Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, apologize for my voice. It's a little off today. I'm not quite sure what's going on. I think my allergies are acting up. But nevertheless, I still want to do the news. So, first of all, I want to thank everyone who assists with the channel. If that's showing up, if that's being in chat, if that's just being a decent, good person while you're in chat talking to other people with different ideas. Whether that's supporting through Patreon, Super Cash, or PayPal. Thank you very much. Even if you share the videos and like the videos, thank you very much. So, coming up this evening, I have a Hard Bastard. Hard Bastard is going to be at 7 p.m. That should be a damn good show. That should be a very interesting show. Let me say it that way. And interesting but good. I don't mean interesting in a bad way. So, that's that. Laura Steiner is going to be here 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. That should be interesting. That's the woman who organized the Boo campaign and tried to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership taken down. I did the video earlier today. So she's going to be here on Wednesday. So that should be a damn good show too. That should be a very interesting show. Thing I wanted to talk about today. So the UK is advancing with the Russia hysteria also. They've picked up the bug from their darker cousin across the pond, and they're running with it. Now, I think it's a little suspicious that Theresa May, the weakest prime minister in recent memory that I can think of, hit with a problem that she doesn't have a solution to, meaning hard Brexit and dealing with Northern Ireland, and also sinking poll numbers, meaning you have a populist revolt in your country, in the UK, in the same way you have a populist revolt here in the United States. In the United States, Russia did it. Russia did it. Russia did everything. They want to blame Russia for each and everything that takes place in the United States in order to try to take the wind out the sails of the populist revolts. In the UK, I just think it's mighty suspicious. Same effect taking place, meaning it's populist revolt. And just so happens, the same solution. Russia did something. Russia did something. I showed you Russia's response, the UN envoy, the Russian envoy in the UN, giving his response to the ultimatum that Theresa May and the British government gave. So it's only right that I show Boris Johnson's response. Boris Johnson, he's, foreign minister. He was one of the Brexiteers, one of the people who were strong on this idea of Brexit, while at the exact same token not knowing what the hell Brexit even meant. What does Brexit mean? Brexit means Brexit. Yeah. What are you going to do about the Irish border? What are you going to do about the Irish border? What are you going to do about the Irish border? Shouldn't you have an answer to that question? I mean, how far are we into this process? And you still don't have an answer to that question. That's a big deal that you don't have an answer to that question. But nevertheless, we have a detour. Russia did it. Russia did something. It's only fair that that's your Boris Johnson's. Now, I watched maybe 3 minutes of this. And then I said, oh my God, because I was being pissed off even within the confines of that 3 minutes. It was annoying the shit out of me. And so I stopped. I said, you know what? I'm going to watch this with my audience. I showed the Russian response. It's only fair I showed Boris Johnson's response. Let's hear what Boris Johnson has to say about this. I will interject periodically. I will try not to make this video to be overwhelmingly long. It's about 20 minutes from the standpoint of his, so it may go a little bit longer than 20 minutes. But let's hear him out. Let's hear him out. Maybe he says something that surprises the hell out of me, in which case I will fall off my chair on live YouTube. All right, Boris Johnson.
Well, listening to that is the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson. Welcome, Mr. Johnson. We have to be very clear and very careful, of course, about this, the evidence in this very serious matter. So you have said it's overwhelmingly likely, overwhelmingly likely that Vladimir Putin was responsible. You saw the ambassador brush that aside. Why do you say that?
Well, we gave the Russians a very clear choice, and the Prime Minister said on Monday, as I said to the Russian ambassador to the UK, either help us to understand how the stockpiles of Novichok have gone missing and how some of it could have turned up on the streets of Wiltshire in this way, or else I'm afraid we will be forced as a Prime Minister said in the House of Commons, to draw the conclusion, as we did in the case of Alexander Litvinenko, that the trail of culpability leads inexorably to the Kremlin.
Look, it's possible that Russia did it, but this line of argument is absurd. I'm sorry. It's patently, absolutely absurd. You gave two options. This puts me in mind of those questions that people ask, like, you know, which one is it? Is it that God doesn't care or God doesn't have the capacity to affect change? And in both of this, the question assumes something that it shouldn't assume. Like, you're assuming that A, life is what you think life is. B, you're assuming that God perceives life in the same way that you perceive life. Meaning what you consider to be suffering, that God will also consider that to be suffering. I'm saying limiting the question, the very point of the question limits the range of answers. You've effectively told Russia, admit that you're guilty, either through incompetence because somebody got their hands on something they weren't supposed to, or that you directly did it. Those are the only two choices that are available to you in this case. What about the choice of we didn't do it? What about that choice? Is that choice not on the menu? No, that choice wasn't on the menu. He gave two choices. Tell us that you did it, but tell us that somebody got their hands on something that you yourself had, which means that even then you're culpable. Explain to us your culpability. And he's saying that these are the only two responses. And by the way, the response that Russia gave him was the response that any reasonable, rational human being would give. Show us your evidence. Show us your evidence. You're accusing me of something, and you're telling me I can't see the thing that you're using to accuse me? That's absurd. That's patently absurd. Let's let him keep going. I mean, I'm just saying, look, my skepticism for this is just because a rational human being, when something takes place, if that person really wants to get to the bottom of something, that person has an investigation. That's like the first thing that takes place before you waving your finger and pointing it at the person who you wanted to be. You have an investigation. You pointed your finger at Russia, Vladimir Putin specifically, before you even had an investigation. It seems like your method of events are out of order. That's what it seems like. It seems like you wanted to have a particular person to point the finger at. Look, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. Someone said in my other video, I said Theresa May did it. I didn't say that. What I said was, you shouldn't just automatically assume that what your government is telling you is correct. And that, yes, there are situations where governments have done things in order to create a pretext for other things. There are possibilities that other governments could have did something, not necessarily the Soviet Union, purely in order to spring up this kind of foment, this resentment more against the Soviet Union, pull in the United States and then pull in the UK into something. All I'm saying is, be skeptical of this stuff. Do not just take the word of your government as if your government is the word of God and your government is telling you the truth. Governments lie. Governments have objectives. Those objectives sometimes run contrary to what the public wants. That's all I'm saying. I'll give you an example. In the United States, after the sarin attack, Donald Trump gets president. There's a sarin attack. After the sarin attack, Donald Trump comes out and says, oh my God, the dead babies. Now mind you, Donald Trump had already killed a lot of dead babies just within the first few terms, a few months he was in the presidency. But for whatever reason, this one particular dead baby from one of the shithole countries, as Donald Trump will call them in shithole countries, that he's trying to keep people from coming to the United States. But whatever reason, he's okay with that dead baby being there, but it hurt him to his heart. And it hurt him to his heart so much, it crumbled him. He couldn't take it. The weight of it was too painful. So he had to fire off an illegal missile strike into Syria. Now, here's the catch. The operative question here is, did Syria actually do it? I mean, after all, they pointed the finger at Syria, but Syria had nothing to gain by this. They had already been kicking ass from the standpoint of ISIS. Russia had backed them up, so their government was propped up. They didn't have to worry about the government collapsing. And militarily, they had their objectives accomplished. Donald Trump, dead babies, within a day, had made the decision that it was Syria that did it. launches strikes. 2018, you ask Mathis, one of the generals that's around Donald Trump, and they say, well, yeah, we don't have any evidence that Syria did that. We don't have any evidence that Syria sent the gas attacks. But wait a minute, Donald Trump pointed the finger at Syria and launched a missile at Syria within the course of a few days. Again, the point of it wasn't so much that Syria did it. They just wanted a pretext in order to hit Syria. More likely than not, Syria didn't do it. Other people had already said that the rebels had access to chemical weapons. The New York Times had it in 2016 that these guys had access to chemical weapons. But the point was, they didn't care. They didn't want to do an investigation because they didn't care what the results of the investigation were. They were more interested in the strike itself. Now, I'm making the point to you that you shouldn't just automatically take your government's word for it. The weapons of mass destruction thing in and of itself should be enough to make you skeptical for generations. How many Brits died fighting a war, a senseless, worthless war? How many? There were 1 million Iraqis that died. You had 4,000 Americans that also died. Spent, what, $7 trillion at this point, some insane amount of cash. My number may be wrong, but it's up there in the same amount of cash. Skepticism should be assumed when your government is coming at you with something. And in this case, your government has jumped automatically to Russia did it. We know Russia did it. No, we haven't shown anybody any other evidence, but you need to take our word for it that Russia did it. All I'm saying is be skeptical. All I'm saying is be skeptical. Let's let them keep going.
And I think listening to the Russian response, listening again to the response of the Russian ambassador to the EU with his satirical suggestion that this was done by UK agents from Porton Down. This is not the response of a country that really believes itself to be innocent. This is not the response of a country that really wants to engage in getting to the bottom of the matter.
What does that mean, getting to the bottom of the matter? I mean, you jumped immediately to accusing the leader of the other country of committing an offense. And then what made it so bad, completely indignant in the way that Britain has handled us. I mean, you guys have looked horrible on this. It's almost as if you didn't believe that you were interacting with equals when you brought up this particular thing. You didn't go through the regular, normal diplomatic channels. None of that stuff. You just went out and accused another country of doing something and didn't want to show the evidence that you had, that you used to make that accusation. And more so, I'm talking about how you did it. Even if Russia did it, there are certain protocols and guidelines that you would typically go through, especially if you consider the country to be of equals between one another. Look at the response in the UK, meaning in the UN. Look at the response of that guy from Russia. I mean, the guy said that Russia needs to shut up. Think about that. They're having these diplomatic conversations, and the guy's using a language of telling one of the countries that they need to shut up. That's amazing. You've accused the country of a crime, and you're telling the country to shut up. What is the response of somebody if they were innocent? Meaning, you accuse somebody of something. The United States has been screaming Russia at the top of their lungs in some insane, hysterical way with little to no evidence to make that case. And then all of a sudden, Britain comes up. Russia is also doing this. Russia is also doing this. What is the response of somebody when they are blaming you for all sorts of stuff that you know you didn't necessarily do? At least I'm talking in the United States. I don't know about this space. What is your response supposed to be? I would imagine you're someone indignant about it. So I am not necessarily shocked at the Russian response. Now, but again, he has not demonstrated anything. He's telling you and asserting stuff. Asserting and telling you stuff is not the exact same thing as giving you actual evidence for you to see and weigh and lay your own eyes upon it and have the international community bear their eyes upon it. If this was any other case, was you were accusing someone of a crime, that person would be able to defend themselves in some kind of court of law. Not necessarily just one person accusing, and all of a sudden all of the processes come in and that person is just automatically guilty. Let's let him finish.
The Prime Minister told the House of Commons there were two possible explanation of this. Either this was a deliberate attack by the Russian state, or else the Novichok had come out and become and got into the hands of criminal gangs. You seem to be excluding the latter possibility now.
We gave the Russians every opportunity to come up with an alternative hypothesis, such as the one that you have just described, and they haven't. And their response has been a sort of mixture of smug sarcasm and denial, obfuscation, and delay. So
this is a fucking aggravating conversation. It honestly is. I mean, come on. You gave them every opportunity to give an alternative explanation. You didn't give them any opportunity for anything. You came out and said you did it. Now confess. For all intents and purposes, whatever the Prime Minister said, that's essentially what the Prime Minister said. I'm paraphrasing. That's not the same thing. Here's an alternative explanation. Maybe it's not Novichok. How about that? I haven't seen what you guys are looking at. Maybe your scientists are looking at this particular thing wrong. Maybe it's not the chemical that you said it is. Maybe they didn't get infected in the exact same place that you think they got infected. Maybe it wasn't Russia that did it. There are all sorts of alternative hypotheses. You just discounted all of those hypotheses and went immediately to confess. No one else has had the chance to interrogate the evidence that you guys are using. So you can say there are all sorts of hypotheses. Maybe you guys got it wrong. Maybe it's not Novichok. Maybe it wasn't necessarily in the place that you're talking about the person was poisoned. Maybe it wasn't the Russians. Come on. I mean, there are plenty of explanations. I guess the point I'm making here is what he's saying here is nonsensical. He gave them, Theresa May just looked at the Russians and said, confess, you did it. Nobody could challenge the evidence because nobody has seen the evidence. Shit, man. I mean, let's be honest. Whatever you want to think, even if you hate Russians, fair enough, you hate Russians, whatever, you're xenophobic. You have to be a little bit wary here, I mean, in the way that they've gone about accusing them of this. It wasn't a situation, what Russia asked for is not insane. What Russia asked for is what anybody would ask for. We want to see the evidence. We want to see the evidence. And I got to be honest, they're not alone in that. I also want to see the evidence. I want to see what they're using. This could potentially become a huge diplomatic incident. If so, you should go through the proper channels, particularly with the gravity of this particular event. Theresa May, at this moment, could bring the NATO powers together under this kind of conservative bullshittedness. I mean, because think about it. The United States has been screaming Russia at the top of its lungs. There's a maniac, Nikki Haley, that's in the UN. That woman should not. It's terrifying that that woman is at the UN. Let me just say it that way. This is somewhat dangerous. So, yeah, I think you should go through the proper channels. I think there's a certain gravity associated with what's taking place. You should go through the proper channels. Not just scream and point. And no, what he's saying here is not true. It's not true at all. He's, again, BSing.
So what we are doing on the Novichok and on the nerve agent, what we will do is tomorrow, technical experts from the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons will come from The Hague to the UK. We will share the samples with them. They will then be tested by the most reputable possible international laboratories. And I might just say, in response to Mr. Chizov's point about Russian stockpiles of chemical weapons, we actually have evidence within the last 10 years that Russia has not only been investigating the delivery of nerve agents for the purposes of assassination, but has also been creating and stockpiling Novichok.
So that was a direct lie that I was being given there.
But you will get that, and that is exactly the tactics that we've come to expect from Russia over the last few years. And one of the things
he said, but you would get that. You would get that. And that's what we've been expecting from the Russians from the last few years. Do you know, Russia is a massive fucking place. It's a very big place. What do you mean you'll get that? I don't understand. Are you trying to say that you're not a liar and a bullshitter, but they are? How do you know? How do we know that you're not in this very moment lying while you at the same time trying to say that these guys are liars? All of you are political actors. All of you to me are hacks. I don't trust any of you. So let's put a pin in that point right there. I just think it's amazingly hypocritical to turn around and say, yeah, you'd get that. You'd get that. They'll lie to you. They'll lie to you. You will lie also. You could be lying at this very moment as you say that somebody else is lying. I just found that to be amazingly as smug as can be and full of BS. Look, I don't know exactly how the politicians are in Britain. The politicians in the United States are just outright liars. They're paid to do a particular task. That task usually goes against the American public of what it is. These guys have become somewhat of a Frankenstein monster in the sense that Americans are decoupled from the political actors themselves. Now, part of this decoupling is because Americans are so terrified of Republicans that they're willing to just get whatever they get with a Democrat. So a Democrat will come in office, which is, our Democrats is someone like your conservatives. But the difference is the public is terrified of Republicans, so they are willing to live with Democrats in the left-leaning party. It's sad. It corrupts the politics, but it's true. It's absolutely true. My point is, if he's anything like the politicians in the United States, politicians lie. And it's most likely that he is probably fibbing through his teeth right now. Catch is, you would never know because you haven't seen the sample. Nobody has seen the sample. He's just telling you, he's asserting all of this stuff. But the only way that you can disprove it or even prove what he's saying is true or false is to actually see the sample and have the sample evaluated. He said he's going to do it tomorrow. Fair enough. Let's see, what's it going?
Things that has really struck me in the course of the last few days, as we've been talking to friends and colleagues around the world, is the difference between their reaction this time and their reaction to the death of Alexander Litvinenko. And then back in 2006, there was a much more hesitation, much more people saying, well, perhaps it could be rogue elements of the Russian state and so on and so forth. Now you have people such as Nikki Haley, the US ambassador to the UN, with her very, very powerful denunciation of Russia. My colleague have people such as Nikki Haley, the US ambassador to the UN, with her very, very powerful denunciation of Russia. My colleague,
By the way, Nikki Haley, given a powerful denunciation, doesn't say anything about anything. The woman is a neocon. She would give a powerful denunciation regardless of what took place. Russia could have, I don't know, accidentally tipped over a statue of Jesus. She would have been in the UN giving a denunciation in Russia. It doesn't really say anything that she's doing that. That's all I'm saying. I wouldn't necessarily go to her as being this kind of beacon of whether something is good or true or moral or anything else. She is not the standard bearer for any of those things. Let's keep going. Let's see if this worked itself out.
Kapuscinski on Friday in London, pointing the finger squarely at Russia. And I think what that indicates is the change in people's attitudes towards Russia because of the experience of the last 10 years.
Change in attitudes, their attitude to us. They don't really care anymore what we do or say.
I think that it's obvious that they do care, and I think that is one of the reasons why the UK is, as it were, in the Kremlin's crosshairs, because they look at us and they think this is the country that time and again has called Russia out, has stood up to Russia when it comes to Crimea, to what they've been doing in Syria, and just to get back to the point I was making just now about the international response.
I want to ask you about. Are you absolutely sure it's this mysterious thing called Novichok? We talk about it all the time now. We all assume that it's that. Yeah. How are we sure?
Well, I obviously.
That's actually a really good question. That's actually a good question. I don't even know if they would have asked that in America. But yeah, that's a good question. How do you know that it's Novichok? That's what one of the Russian ambassador asks also. How do you know it's Novichok? The only way that you can proof positive know that it's Novichok is if you have a version of Novichok yourself. You said that this is an illegal and a banned substance, and you have this version of this exact same substance. How are you pointing the finger at us if you believe that we have this substance when you yourself have an aversion of this substance? I understand what they're getting at. There's a certain level of hypocrisy into it. Not to mention, the moment that you say you have this substance yourself, you yourself become a potential suspect in doing it, meaning your own government becomes somewhat of a suspect since your government also has this version of it. Also, by the way, how do you know that it's Russia? Like, what is your time stamp or your location stamp on this particular chemical that points back to Russia? There's a lot of questions that are associated with this, and none of those questions have been answered. Let's see if he answers this one.
To the best of our knowledge, this is a Russian-made nerve agent that falls within the category Novichok, made only by Russia. And just to get back to the point about the international reaction, which is so...
Whoa. Let's not just get back to the point. In fact, him wanting to get back to the point so fast and get away from that particular thing makes me want to talk more about that particular thing. I mean, he's obviously running away from that particular question. How do you know that it's Russian? And then he asserts Russia again, trying to say Russia as many times as he possibly can and associated with the chemical weapons. How do you know? You're just asserting. How do you know? How do you know that it's Novichok? For one, how do you know it's from Russia? Two, you're saying to the best of your ability. That's a little bit different than as a flat fact, proof positive. There is no possibility that this is something else. This is Novichok. Those are very different scenarios. Those are very, very different scenarios. How do you know that it's Novichok? One, do you have a Novichok yourself? Two, how do you know that this was Russian made? Three, how do you know it's from Russia in and of itself at all? Like, how do you get the location of this particular chemical? Four, and how do you know Russia did it? Five, how do you know? Those are just basic questions that I would want to know. And you're running away from the very question that matters the most. How do you know that it's from Russia? How do you know it's from Russia? Let alone, how do you know what it is? Meaning, I can't even take... I have nothing to go on here. Like, and he's giving you nothing to go on. If you understand what I'm saying. You can't take what he's saying as being proof positive because it's just a person asserting something. So him saying it's Novichok, okay, we don't really know that. That's just you saying that. You saying to the best of your knowledge, it's, well, that's very different than that's exactly what it is. Yes, I'm playing prosecutor because he's sliding us. These guys are trying to escalate. And if they're going to escalate to something that's larger or escalate to some level of conflict, A, that hurts the left. And B, it hurts your country. Why do you want to waste time and resources and allow these guys to obfuscate from all their failings and fuck-ups and foibles in order to get in some kind of focus on Russia like they're doing in the United States? Avoid this hysteria, please. Please avoid this hysteria. Let's keep going.
Fascinating. People have all now experienced, whether it's in America, Germany, France, say nothing of the Baltic countries, the Balkans, and Poland, they've all experienced Russian meddling, malign, disruptive Russian behavior over the last few years. They can see a country that is going in the wrong direction. And that's why they're so inclined now to not to give Russia the benefit of the doubt and to stand shoulder to shoulder with the UK.
I don't understand. I'm sorry to keep interrupting. I'm sorry. I don't like hypocrisy. I don't like it. I don't like it. I understand that us as human beings, we may fuck up, we may screw up, we may fall short of the things that we're trying to accomplish. Fair enough. That's just us in our personal affairs, trying to do the best that we can and not necessarily always living up to our expectations. That's a different thing, though, when somebody is a political actor and they're saying something that's untrue and they know what they're saying is untrue. Or at the very least, they're looking at the world with this extraordinarily biased perspective where certain things are okay and other things are not. And what makes one thing okay and the other thing not is purely just based on who you know, who you're closest to. I'm buddies with that person, so it's okay when they do it. I don't like this other person, so it's not okay when they do it, even though they're doing the exact same thing. This is the country that invaded another country and destroyed the government of that country on the pretense of a lie. And are we saying that the UK doesn't meddle in other people's elections? Like, I'm trying to understand the standard here that this guy is trying to set. He seems very selective. Let's let him keep going.
Do you think, given that background, that 2% is enough for our defence spending? An awful lot of your colleagues, including Tobias Ellwood, Defence Minister, it's no longer enough. What's happened to the dollar, but also the threats that we now face from the East, that we do need to protect ourselves better as a country than we have been doing, and we need to spend more money.
Well, we are one of the biggest spenders on defence in NATO, as you know, where we contribute about 20% of European defence spending already, and it's quite right that we should spend well on our defences. And
my question is, should we be spending more than we are targeted to at the moment?
We must make sure that we are adequately and properly defended, and certainly that is a case that I make, and I know
the Chancellor and
other ministers certainly have been making that case. But when it comes to the defences of this country, we are also ensuring that we're protected against cyber attack and attacks on our critical national infrastructure and other such threats.
We read.
They will use this to attack the left, by the way. And part of the reason that I'm not fully convinced on this, I haven't seen any evidence, so I can't be convinced or unconvinced. It's just an allegation at this point. But they use this type of stuff to attack the left. The left is less bombastic, less willing to go into unnecessary conflicts. Do you understand? You guys had people dying in the streets because your NHS couldn't necessarily deal with the capacity or deal with the upflow of people during the wintertime. And you guys are talking about spending additional money on defense. Shouldn't you make sure that you are actually under attack before spending all of this money on defense? And I guarantee you that this is going to be used to attack Jeremy Corbyn. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. I will bet my bottom dollar that they're already doing it. I mean, ultimately, anytime you have something of a threat, the lefties are less inclined to get into these kind of confrontational actions, meaning they're less inclined to pivot themselves into this kind of aggressive stance unless they're forced to. If there's somebody at your gates, yeah, that lefty is going to defend their gates. But if there's not anybody at their gates, the lefty is not going to defend the gates in the same way. They're going to deal with the internal issues. They're going to try to be fair with international politics. And that's essentially what Jeremy Corbyn has tried to do. He's tried to not be hysterical when dealing with this, while at the same token, dealing with the international politics, dealing with the issues that affect Brits. Part of my suspicion for this is the pivot to defense. The question becomes, are Brits more inclined to react with their lizard brain and automatically jump on the bandwagon of a muscular Britain? Or are they going to be rational and say to themselves, are we really under attack? Is this really something that we need to spend cash on and additional resources on when we have so many issues that we need to address in the nation itself? We have Brexit coming up. Is there really something else that we need to step into right now? Yes, you have an investigation. You figure out what took place. It's possible that Russia did it. It's possible that some other actor has did it. You don't know. And you can't assume that the conservative government is playing with clean hands. I mean, you can't assume that the Tories are playing with clean hands. Let's keep going. They are political actors. Regardless of what's taking place, they're political actors. They need to be understood in that context. Let's see.
Today that there has been increased worry about attacks on the infrastructure, electricity supply, nuclear power stations, water and so forth. Is that something the government is worried about at the moment?
Well, as I say, it's something, obviously, it's a threat that has changed over the last few years because cyber attacks are a relatively new development, but we have the National Cyber Security Centre.
Come on, come on. Come on. Okay, it's... For whatever reason, this is decided it stopped playing. Come on. Alright, let me restart and see if I can get it to reload.
On the nerve agent. What we will do is, tomorrow, technical experts from, say nothing of the Baltic countries, the Balkans and Poland, they've all experienced Russian meddling.
With Defense Minister, it's no longer enough what's happened to the dollar, but also the threats that we now face from the East, that we do need to protect ourselves better as a country than we have been doing, and we need to spend more money.
Well, we are one of the biggest spenders on defence in NATO, as you know, where we contribute about 20% of European defence spending already, and it's quite right that we should spend well on our defences. And
my question is, should we be spending more than we are targeted to at the moment?
We must make sure that we are adequately and properly defended, and certainly that is a case that I make, and I know
the Chancellor and
other ministers certainly have been making that case. But when it comes to the defences of this country, we are also ensuring that we're protected against cyber attack and attacks on our critical national infrastructure and other such threats.
We read today that there has been increased worry about attacks on the infrastructure, electricity supply, nuclear power stations, water, and so forth. Is that something the government is worried about at the moment?
Well, as I say, it's something, obviously, it's a threat that has changed over the last few years, because cyber attacks are a relatively new development, but we have the National Cyber Security Centre. We have fantastic preparations against such threats.
You'll have heard the ambassador talking about Nikolai Glushkov. Do you think the death of Mr. Glushkov is connected to this affair?
That's a matter for the police, and they have to get on with their investigation. I have no evidence of any connection.
Now, the ambassador also said that the Russians are prosecuting the deaths of the daughter, Mr. Kripal, and Mr. Glushkov, because they're both Russian citizens, and that their people will be arriving here and talking to our police, looking for cooperation. Will they get cooperation?
We have wanted cooperation from the Russians in this matter for some days, and we've been greeted with a lot of sarcasm and...
Well, yes, you wanted cooperation, but you wanted cooperation from the standpoint of just having somebody admit guilt. It's like, hey, can you cooperate and just say that you're guilty? We're trying to use this Russian nonsense to obfuscate from the issues that are in our country. Can you please just play along and just admit your guilt? Please. Okay, these guys aren't cooperating. These guys aren't just owning up to this particular thing that took place. You can't be serious. This is what I mean. This is what I mean. How am I supposed to take him seriously? How am I supposed to take him seriously? Like, Russia, you did it, admit that you did it, and now we jump from we believe that they're highly likely to they absolutely did it, and from that point on we're off to the races. What about the investigation? Like, if you remember, he's blamed Russia, but after he said he blamed Russia, after he said Putin did it and everything else in this interview, he says we're going to do an investigation. We're going to open this up for international investigation. Shouldn't you have done that first? Before blaming? It just seems like the rational thing to do would be to have the investigation first. Call me crazy, but that just seems right. Let's keep going. I can't take him seriously. That's all. I have a hard time taking somebody seriously if they're... Look, the Russian response to this made all the sense in the world, considering how indignant Britain was acting. And their response was, oh my God, we're getting blamed for something else. We're getting blamed for something else. You guys are blaming all of your fuck-up foibles and problems on us. And in this case, the spy goes down. Is it possible that Russia did it? Yes, I'm saying it's possible that Russia did it. But I'm also making the point that it's possible somebody else did it. It looks strange to me that they automatically jump to this thing of Russia, point the finger, then say, yeah, we're going to have an investigation later. We're going to have an investigation later. But we're pretty certain that Russia did it. Just trust us. We never lie.
I think plainly an attitude of a country that is guilty of that. If we can genuinely be of assistance to the Russians in getting to the in what they're
Okay,
doing.
But if Russian investigators arrive in London and say, we're interested in the attack on Yulia and the death of Mr. Glushkov, we would like to work alongside the British police and have access to the investigation that we're conducting, they will be given that.
We will do everything we can to assist in getting to the bottom of what has happened. Whether it is appropriate to have Russian investigators on UK soil engaged in trying to get to the bottom, I somewhat doubt. But what we will certainly do, as I said earlier,
we will help as far as we can.
What we will do is we will ensure that, and this is I'm afraid the ambassador was completely misleading about the UK's obligations under the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. We have followed those obligations to the letter. And what we will be doing now is getting the samples and making sure that they are available to the technical experts to allow them to elucidate exactly what they are. And I think you would agree. I think you would agree that they are a rather more reliable, and I think the British people have much more confidence in what they do than in any Russian investigation.
Let's move on to what happens next. We kicked out 23 of their people we regard as spies. They've kicked
or British. Let's be honest, or British. Like, look, I understand this is British television. Fair enough. And I would imagine that British television has the same bias that the United States television has. Meaning, if the British television is talking about something and it's related to the United States government, it talks about it from the standpoint of what they're doing is right. And even though it may fuck up, even though it may be incompetent at times, that ultimately it's doing what's right. It's somewhat sacrosanct that what America doing in the world is right. It's just America, of course. Whatever we're doing is right. We may mess up, we may make bad choices, but we're not necessarily doing it for bad reasons or bad ends. Now, this is a magnificent bias, and it's a bias that's extremely problematic because fact is, there are times where we do things for bad ends. If your bias is automatically that we don't do bad things for bad ends, then you're automatically misleading your audience. You're misleading your audience. You're misleading them on purpose. You're trying to give a perspective that is not always necessarily true. We didn't necessarily go into Libya for humanitarian reasons, even though we continuously said it was humanitarian reasons. We went there for either gold or oil or this thing of breaking up this idea of this kind of pan-African currency, this kind of geopolitical reasons. All I'm saying is, if your bias is similar to the bias in the States, then this kind of conversation that he's having with Boris Johnson is going to go down in some same way, meaning Boris Johnson said they're more reliable than the Russians. Well, he's assuming that people consider him to be also reliable. Yes, they're also more reliable than the Brits. You can't take the stuff from one state as being... You need an international body to make these decisions. One state accusing another state is no different than one person accusing another person. You need something that's external to that process in order to come to some conclusion on what actually took place. If they're finally going through the international body and they're letting the international body for the chemicals and everything else, whatever the name of that thing is, that's a good step. They should do that. They should do that. Let's keep going. That part I like. I don't like the hypocrisy, and I don't necessarily like the way he's doing it. But look, I understand he's a political actor, and he has a particular perspective that he wants to get out to the public. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Kicked out 23 of ours. Tit for tat, is that?
Well, there is a normal symmetry in these diplomatic affairs, and you would expect that. Look, you've got to understand...
Is it going to go further than that symmetry is what I'm asking, really?
We will discuss at the National Security Council this week what further measures, if any, we may want to take. But I would just stress this, that the UK is already pursuing a number of measures, hardening our borders. Of course, we're pursuing the diplomatic expulsions.
Let me ask you about money.
But we are also going to be using the tools that are available to us under existing statute to pursue those who may have corruptly obtained their wealth. We will be going further with what is called a Magnitsky clause in the sanctions bill. And so all these things are moving forward
2 weeks ago, the Labour Party put down Magnitsky Act amendments, and the Conservatives voted against them. Why was that?
Well, there were deficiencies in the way those amendments were drafted, which didn't make them suitable. But we are working to get provisions that will allow those who have been responsible for gross violations of human rights to be prosecuted and not to be able to come to this country.
To be absolutely clear, you are going to, as a government, you're going to go after named individuals who have in the past been able to wash their money through London, invest in housing and so forth, and you're going to grab their money.
Well, we live in a democracy under the rule of law. It's not open to me as a politician in this country to direct the law enforcement agencies to go after such and such a person. That's what they do in Russia. What we have said, and what we have statute now since April last year under the Criminal Finance Act to do this. We have said that where people have obtained wealth by corruption, and where we can see a link with the Kremlin, with Vladimir Putin, it may be possible to have unexplained wealth orders and other sanctions on those individuals. And that work is going on now, and it will be intensifying. But you would not expect me. You would not expect me to reveal the names.
Labour says that part of the Conservative hesitation in this is that you, as a party, have been taking far too much Russian money for far too long. And there's the case of the lady Lyubov Chernukin, who paid £160,000 to have a game of tennis with you.
Yeah. Well,
Did that game actually take place?
Can I just make a point about this whole
You're going to say good Russians and bad Russians. I know that.
I am actually. I'm going to say.
I was going to say back to you that this lady's husband was a minister of Vladimir Putin and was given an award by Vladimir Putin. So he was close to the regime. And you, as a party, were prepared to take £160,000 from her so that she could have a game of tennis with Boris Johnson.
Well, if there is evidence of gross corruption in,
it's not a regime; it's a government. I hate it when they do that. It's not a regime, it's a government. I don't like that particular level of propaganda that they're putting out there. Look, calling it a regime tries to make it sound illegitimate, like it's something different or it's something foreign or something not quite up to the level of a government in the same way that your government is, configured. No, it's a government. It is a different arrangement. It's not necessarily the best arrangement in the world. It is oppressive. It is authoritarian, but it is a government nonetheless. You should respect it as such. If you want the same respect afforded to you. Let's keep going. Not to mention, Theresa May's government is on its way out. So,
in the way that gentleman you mentioned obtained his wealth, or then it is well within the. It is possible for our law enforcement agencies to deprive him of his wealth with an unexplained wealth order. That is a matter for the authorities. It's not a matter for me, and it is very, very important now because I'm getting a lot of people emailing me from Russia who feel that they feel that Russians. It's very, very important that we stress.
I agree with that, sir, but
the Russians themselves are in no way the object of our wrath.
I just want to pursue this particular case.
We have no quarrel with the Russian people.
Did the tennis game actually happen?
It did.
It did. Are you happy that the same lady, do you know enough about the origins of that money? And she has now paid £30,000 to sit next to the Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, and have dinner with him. Are you happy about that?
Look, unless and until evidence is produced against individual Russians, I do not think that the entire nation should be calumnified.
Early on, everything was the Russians, and now that they've caught you playing tennis with one of those quote-unquote Russians. Oh, I don't think we should vilify all the Russians. There's some good Russians and there's some bad Russians. The Russians that give me $100 and some thousand, those are the good Russians. Those other sniveling bitches, not so much. But look, they give me $130 some thousand, so they're pretty good. I think that one is pretty damn good, personally. He's bought. he got paid $130,000 for a game of tennis. Let me ask you this: if that person needed to get something accomplished, or if that person needed to get something done, do you believe that Boris Johnson, after getting over $100,000, would have a wanting ear for that person? Would be a phone call away, would be a cell phone or text message away? Do you think that $100,000 is just because Boris is an awesome tennis player? Or do you think that money is for influence? The money is for influence. The money is for influence. If somebody gave you $130,000 and they called you one day, do you pick up that phone call? would you want another $130,000 for another tennis match? I mean, would you play a game of tennis for $130,000? I bet you would. Most people would. And yes, he would play that game again. And if that woman called, he would be on the end waiting for that particular phone call. That's influence. The money buys influence. They don't do it just because they wanted a tennis game with Boris Johnson.
It's a difficult balance. I absolutely agree with that.
It is very, very important. There are many Russians who have come to this country and made their lives here and contributed magnificently to our culture and our society. And they feel threatened.
Traduced. I understand that.
So
but on the other hand,
it is very important.
Let me remind you what Marina Litvinenko, the widow of Mr. Litvinenko, Sasha, said. She said, Theresa May and the Conservatives need to be very selective who are your friends with. When you allow people with money to come to your country and make a business, you need to be sure what kind of money these people try to bring to your country. Because very often, she said, it had come about inappropriately. All I'm saying is it's very difficult to know exactly the source of the money that you take.
Well, that's why we have the National Crime Agency. That's why we have the National Economic Crime Unit. That's what they are there to do. They are there to get to the bottom of whether somebody's wealth has been obtained corruptly or not. But really and truly, it is very important that we do not allow a miasma of suspicion.
I accept
about
that.
It's not a miasma of suspicion, dude. The suspicion is very specific to you. You guys are screaming about Russians, and you're acting like these guys are somehow attacking your country. A spy goes down. You didn't even wait to figure out. Didn't even have an investigation. That's the second point. But the first point is, if you're going to scream that the Russians are trying to get influence in the country, okay, fair enough, fair enough. And you think that there's some level of Russian aggression, okay, fair enough. Russians, they're all around. They're ever present. They're ubiquitous. Well, wouldn't that influence include paying off certain politicians in order to get political influence and clout? I mean, they did it in the United States, the Uranium One deal. That was them trying to get a certain amount of influence with regards to uranium. They were able to move some of that uranium out the country through Canada. So, and one of the informants was pretty clear in saying that they were trying to send money to Hillary Clinton in order to influence politically through the Clinton Foundation. Now, if they were willing to do that in the United States, and you believe that Russians are all over the place, they're ubiquitous, they're ever present, they're omnipresent. They gave you over $100,000. Are you that good of a tennis player? Is your backhand that great? What is it about you and your tennis ability that these people are paying you that much money for? Or is it possible that the tennis game was just something that you can attach a number to? In which case, it's just a bribe. The point of the money is there purely to buy political influence. They want to be able to whisper in your ear, and they want you there to listen to them when they whisper in your ear. The $100,000, I would bet anything in the world that it was there purely just to buy influence. If you honestly believe that somebody's giving this guy $100,000, this pudgy man, this pudgy tall man, $100,000 to play a game of tennis, I have a bridge to sell you. I have a beautiful, magnificent bridge to sell you. It's called influence. Trust me, I'm from the United States. We have open air bribery in regards to our politicians. You may not have it to the degree that we have it, but trust me, a bribe is a bribe is a bribe. If they're giving him that much money, they're giving him that much money for a reason, and it's not for his tennis game. Let's keep going.
All Russians in London, and indeed all rich Russians in London, to be created. Some of them, some of them may have obtained their wealth by corruption. And I have to say, I think it is quite extraordinary at a time when you have two people lying gravely ill in hospital in Salisbury, when a police officer is still is still not out of hospital, for the fire somehow to be turned on Conservative Party funding. As far to the best of my knowledge, all possible checks have been made. And
I love that. I love that. He's like, wait a minute, you're asking me about my money? Look, man, there's somebody in the hospital. Why are we talking about me being bribed? Why are we having this conversation? Yes, I'm a politician. Yes, I'm close to the prime minister. Yes, I'm parcel to making rules. And yes, I was the one who was screaming about the Russians and Vladimir Putin. But I want to talk about the other Russians, not the Russians that are putting over $100,000 in my G-string as I dally about the tennis court, hitting balls back and forth. I don't want to talk about myself getting bribed. I want to talk about something else. I don't blame you, dude. I don't want to talk about something else either. I don't want to talk about being bribed either. I don't blame you.
And they will continue to be made.
You'll have seen the story this morning about Cambridge Analytica, this data collection company, in trouble for harvesting information from Facebook and then using it to target potential voters. They were involved in the Brexit referendum and the American elections as well.
Yeah,
they've been summoned back to the House of Commons. Do you think there should be a proper investigation into this?
I've got to be honest with you, Andrew, it's not something I've focused on.
Well, let's move to something you have focused on, I'm sure.
But I'm sure if there are, if again, I mean, the general point can be made. If there's some crime or then I'm sure that the law must follow its course.
The Brexit Select Committee has suggested that
I'm amazed at his response to this. I mean, does this response fly? I mean, he's bringing up like, dude, this looks massively corrupt that you guys are taking this much money from the Russians. Because you're saying that the Russians are somehow attacking the country and they're trying to get influence in the country. And come to find out, you guys are taking this massive amounts of cash, all of these bribes. You're talking about you're playing a tennis game. Bill Clinton took $50,000 for a speech. You think they really gave Bill Clinton $50,000 for that speech, or they gave it for that influence? Same thing with you. Do you really believe that they gave you $100,000 because you had an awesome backhand? I understand you want to talk about other things. And the argument that, well, we have a police force and that police force's job is to look for corruption. If there's corruption, they'll look for corruption. Wait a minute. That doesn't really answer the question. He's asking you, do you think this is somewhat problematic that you guys are taking this much money? Your response is, if the police find something, then yes. If they don't find anything, then I guess everything is okay and on the up and up. If no crime has been committed, let's keep it moving. But his question to you is a little bit more subtle than that. You're screaming about the Russians trying to buy influence, and he's showing you a case where they bought influence, namely you. Namely you. Let's keep going. I don't want to keep interrupting.
we may have to delay the triggering of Article 50 because we're not ready. What's your response?
Well, I don't think that's true at all, and I think that we're making great progress.
The Brexit Select Committee has suggested that we may have to delay the triggering of Article 50 because we're not ready. What's your response?
Well, I don't think that's true at all, and I think that we're making great progress in the negotiations, and I hope that we'll get a good deal on the implementation period in March. And I think the House of Commons voted overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50, and let's get on with it.
There's another report today, however, saying that our border arrangements simply won't be ready in time. We need more time to do this. Are you concerned that the thing is going to slip?
No, I think we can. I think what most people in this country want, whether they voted leave or to remain, they want us to get on and do with it.
Why did you feel it necessary to write a letter?
Boris, good sir, how are you going to solve the Irish border? And be specific, please. How are you going to square the circle? How are you going to square that circle? How are you going to make sure there's not a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland? Explain to me. Explain to all of us. Each and every one of us want to know. I guarantee you that even the EU wants to know. Because right now, nobody knows. Theresa May is saying things that are completely contradicting one another. Everybody wants to know. How are you going to solve the border issue? How are you going to solve the border issue? How are you going to solve the border issue? How on earth are you going to solve the hard border issue? Don't give platitudes. This was the same guy who said Brexit was going to be this kind of easy thing. It has not been an easy thing. And I have to be honest, I am somewhat terrified for Britain here. I was not one of those people who was against the Brexit thing. In fact, I didn't have any feelings one way or the other about Brexit. I didn't necessarily know. I thought there was a chance that it was better off, but by the same token, maybe not. I thought that these things were interconnected pretty heavily at this point. And yet, if Britain wanted to leave, Britain wanted to leave. If they thought they were getting a raw deal, it is their right as a sovereign nation to leave. leaving, of course, has consequences. And dealing with those consequences, I think we've kind of hit our head on the reality of this will not be as easy as I think some of these guys thought it was going to be. This is one of those guys that thought it was easy. So take with a grain of salt Boris' prognostications.
To the Prime Minister saying that there might be a hard Irish border.
What I said, I don't wish to
I've got the quote here. We can help you with the quote.
You can. What you have is, I'm afraid, only
it is wrong to see our task as maintaining no border. Even if a hard border is reintroduced, we would expect 95% of goods to pass. So you use the phrase hard border twice, which is interesting because you are a member of a government which says there's not going to be a hard border.
The whole point about the letter was to say we don't need a hard border, okay? And that's the policy of the government, and that's what we're going to produce. And if you read the Prime Minister's Mansion House speech, which was excellent, you will have seen. You will have seen that she produced a number of solutions for the avoidance of a hard border, and that was what I was advocating, and that was if you had the entire document, it would be very clear.
You said you were going to publish the letter. When are you going to do that?
Well, we do not. It is up to the media organisations that leaked a part of it. If they choose to,
you said you would publish it.
Well, it turns out that
you've changed your mind.
We do not, as a matter of course, respond to leaks by putting the whole thing into the public domain. But I can assure you that the letter said the exact opposite of what you have just claimed it said.
Well, I've just read a bit of it. So,
I know.
These are words, and
yes, I know,
words mean things and so forth.
And they don't, as it happens, mean what you want them to mean.
It is wrong to see our task as maintaining no border. The government's only aim should be stop this border becoming significantly harder, even if a hard border is reintroduced, you say, and then you go on. Well,
if you read, well,
let me read it. Publish it.
What I was saying is very clearly in line with what the government as a whole has been saying for a long time, which is there is no need to have a hard border. There are ways of avoiding it, as the Prime Minister said in her excellent Mansion House speech, and I suggest that you quote that and read that and put that.
Okay, I'm going to quote something.
The EU has roundly rejected what Theresa May has been putting forth. What am I missing? What am I missing? It's as if he's at war with reality itself. EU has come out and said what Theresa May is saying does not work. It is the Narnia option, the fantasy option. They're asking her for specifics. What specific solution do you have for the Irish border? The technical solution, technological solution doesn't work. They've had experts come on saying that it's not going to work. They've said at this point, Ireland first, meaning they need to solve this very specific issue of what are you going to do about the Irish border? What are you going to do? Boris can talk around this question all he wants. At the end of the day, the question still remains and lingers. What are you going to do about Ireland? We're all waiting for specifics. So let me move on.
Something back at you as well. Do you think that Russia intervened in the Brexit referendum?
I have no evidence for that.
You've said in the past you didn't think they successfully intervened, but you have no evidence that they intervened at all.
I certainly have no evidence that they successfully intervened, no.
Certainly not. Okay, no. One last Brexit-related question, then we can move on. We haven't spoken for a little while. As one of the great cheerleaders for Brexit, when you look at what's happening now, when you look at the fact that the European Court will have some influence on us after we leave, when you look at the fact that we're going to be paying money in to be members of some agencies, and you look at the timescale of all of this, are you completely cheerful that it has turned out as you wanted it to do?
I think we've got ourselves into. I do. I think that the Mansion House speech was a great step forward, and I think it shows exactly the type of deal we want to get. We're not going to have the influence of the European Court of Justice. We're not. I don't know why you're saying all this sort of BBC claptrap.
No,
we're not going to be paying in. We're not going to be paying in.
If it's claptrap, it's the Prime Minister's claptrap.
We're not going to be paying in. We're not going to be paying in after we come out. Yes, there will be an implementation period, but after we come out, we'll have what is effectively a gigantic free trade deal with all sorts of bolt-ons. And the advantage of the new arrangements, as the Prime Minister spelt out at Mansion House, is that it will be possible for either side to do things differently, to do things in their own way. And
So
there will be an
in due course-
independent arbitration panel that will be able to
Okay,
decide
can I just
whether.
ask
No,
one-
can I just finish the point? So you just respect me.
Okay.
There will be an independent arbitration panel that will be able to decide whether or not there is a distortion of trade entailed.
Okay.
So we have, on money, on borders, on laws, you are seeing the fulfillment of the pledge
But
to
we
take
have-
back control.
We have
And-
also
and
taken
it is-
back. We have to
and-
take back control of the clock and the time because we have run out of time. Boris.
I could be, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I am profoundly missing something. I've seen nothing to show what Boris Johnson has just said here. Boris Johnson is on something. I mean, he's acting like Brexit is fucking awesome. Brexit has not been fucking awesome. They're talking about provisions where certain places, because they're so integrated, being decimated from the standpoint of trade. And he's acting like they're going to get this massive trade deal. The EU has already said they suspended talks because of the Irish border. Like I'm trying to get across this idea of how severe this is. This is a big deal, and they don't have a solution for this. He can say all he wants about what the Prime Minister said. They have outright rejected what the Prime Minister said, saying that she is looking for three things that cannot coincide with one another. I don't know what Boris Johnson is talking about. I don't know what Boris Johnson is talking about. Unless something has changed over the course of this day, I don't know what he is talking about. But again, this was one of the Brexit cheerleaders. And I have to be honest, I was listening to a speech from a guy from Ireland. Yeah, Ireland. And he kind of made this point like, nobody thought about Ireland when they were talking about Brexit. Like when they were going through all the motions of Brexit and everything else. Nobody thought about Ireland. It didn't come up. And he's right. I didn't think one iota about Ireland. I didn't even think that there was an issue with Ireland until after Brexit. And then you had the hard Brexit issue. What do you do about Ireland? How do you square that circle? How do you square it? I don't know how to square that circle. And I suspect neither does he and neither does the EU, at least within the margins that they have allowed themselves. If they come up with a technological solution for this, good. That would be amazing. But at this moment, people are saying that that is not a possible thing. So, Boris Johnson, ladies and gentlemen. Liquid Zero. Boris is a proven liar, twice fired by newspapers for misreporting, and philanderer, numerous children with women and not his wife. Ouch. Alan Harris. We've caved into the EU when we were under no obligation to give them any money. All the EU want is our money, and they got it that, and now they want everything. What's his name? Varoufakis said they need to stop negotiating, meaning that the UK, saying that the UK is going to get dragged into a horrible deal the way that this is going. That the UK, for the most part, is somewhat. Like you must understand, and I understand his logical, and the logic somewhat makes sense. If you give the UK a really good deal that the UK left, what about other states? What does it say for other states if the UK can leave and it leaves on great terms and everything is just fucking awesome for the UK? To some degree, there is an incentive for them to make the UK somewhat suffer in order to get across this idea that nobody else needs to leave. The institution itself wants to preserve itself, meaning it needs to put out or function in a way that creates a disincentive for nations to leave the EU. In this case, Britain is leaving. Is Britain going to get this awesome deal that makes it worthwhile for them to leave? Or is Britain going to suffer to some degree? Is Britain going to be the whipping boy to make everybody else fall in line and dissuade others from taking the same course of action? I don't know. We'll see. I mean, we'll see how they interact with Britain, if they're going to interact with them fairly. I am nowhere near as confident as Boris Johnson is. And I have no idea why he's all that confident. I have no idea. I watched the thing with Ireland and I thought to myself, oh my God. That was the first time, I think, when I looked at this where I thought, I don't know how they square the circle. I don't know how they square the circle. Even from a business standpoint, the amount of business that they're going to lose by losing the single market, they're acting as if America can somehow make up the gap for the time for what they're going to lose in the UK. I mean, for the EU. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. Those trade connections, those interactions that you've had with the EU have been there for years. There's no way America is going to make up the difference between those things. No. Your best bet was somehow to keep track with that single market. The problem is, if you keep track with the single market, you're going to lose the other things that you wanted, meaning this idea of controlling your borders. I don't know how you square the circle. Nicholas Shadowski. I don't think he's as confident as he pretends to be. Yeah, I think this is politics. I mean, the first thing that he was saying in the beginning was somewhat disingenuous in the way that he was talking about Russia and thing. It's like, you're not even being serious when you're having this conversation, dude. So yeah, I don't think he's all that confident either. At least he shouldn't be. Look, either he's incompetent or he's lying. I don't know which one. I don't know which one. Shadursky. I don't think he's a comedy actor. Shadursky. Chris Foster. On the plus side, we have an expanding bullshit market. Right, right. Chris Foster. Right. Bullshit is in vogue at this point. Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes. We have an expanding bullshit market. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Tim Flowbug. Politicians have no consequences for their words. And that's a problem, right? That's a problem. It's like words don't have meanings anymore. Tomosi Young. Their bread and butter politicians push the narratives of their buyers. He didn't want to talk about their buyers. Like, he wanted to talk about all these Russians and how bad Russians were, except he wanted to make a distinction. There are some good Russians. The good Russians are the ones that give me over $100,000. But there are good Russians. You should not tar all of the Russians. There are some good ones that give me a lot of money. On the upside, class war are pretty much permanently camped outside its house. They are very vocal. Nicholas, scapegoating. Yeah, that's exactly what he's doing. I am suspicious of this. That's all. It's a little weird that America has been hysterical about Russia. Then all of a sudden, Britain becomes hysterical about Russia. Or at least they try to get you hysterical about Russia. Spy goes down and they take on the same actions as America has taken on. A populist revolt is taking place in America, just like a populist revolt is taking place in Britain. Theresa May is at her weakest. She's a weak prime minister. And she has problems that she can't necessarily solve through normal politics. Meaning, how do you stop a populist revolt? Well, they stopped this populist revolt early on in the 50s using the McCarthy smear. I think it was the 50s, but the McCarthy era. And now they're trying to do something similar using Russians. Well, they don't have the Soviet Union. We have the internet. So there's a little pushback on this. But this is exactly what they're trying to do in the States. Experiencing the same populist revolt in Britain, and all of a sudden, the Ruskies are coming. That's an amazing coincidence. Also, there's certain problems that she can't solve. I mean, this Irish border thing. What is the solution? What's the solution? Look, all I'm saying is just be skeptical of your government. I'm not going to belabor that point. I've said it in a few videos. Jim Hyde. So Boris is highly paid professional liar who is behind in child support. Is he? That's funny. Garnome, the world is no longer unipolar and the United States resists this in terms of policy and propaganda. Yes, Garnome. Yes, absolutely. Like, understand what Garnome is saying, because Garnome is right. When the United States assumed itself as a unipolar power, they assumed that they can do whatever they want. Like, they went into Iraq, all of these countries, one country after the next, and there was no pushback, meaning there was no response. Bush killed 1 million Iraqis. There was no response. At that point, the United States considered, we've won. We won. Now, Russia is trying to assert authority in its own domain, meaning Ukraine and Syria. And the United States doesn't like it. So it camps out in Syria, a country that doesn't belong to it. It's literally illegally in somebody else's country, again, assuming that it's a unipolar power. And that it's getting pushback from other countries who say, no, you're not a unipolar power. You can't just go into one country after the next in the way that you've gone into those countries. And the United States gets indignant by this. I mean, it gets completely indignant. Now, Britain, all of a sudden, the Ruskies. It sounds as if they're trying to create a pretext in order to attack either Syria or some element of Russia. Be very skeptical. There are magnificent consequences in the way things are going here, especially when you get NATO involved in this process. Be very careful. That's all I'm saying. Jim Hayden. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. Guys, I appreciate Super Cash. Thank you very much. Chris Foster, wait till they try and sort out Gibraltar. Yeah, man. Hillary is much more evil than Theresa May. To most of the end. Yeah, Hillary, yeah. Theresa May got nothing on Hillary Clinton. Theresa May has nothing on Hillary Clinton. I'm not going to keep this. I'm just saying, be skeptical. That's all. Keep your skepticism intact. Look for evidence and just be aware that their word and authoritarian, this kind of weird authority, so you should just trust us. It's not evidence. It's not the same thing as evidence. Boris can assert all he wants. What really it boils down to is, why are you accusing Russia? How are you accusing Russia? What are you using to accuse Russia? How do you know that the chemical is what you say the chemical is? Why do you think the chemical came from Russia? What are you using to determine the location of where this chemical is made? Are there other actors that can make this particular chemical and make this particular chemical in this particular way? There are multiple questions that need to be asked. Assuming that Russia did it just right off the bat without even having an investigation, it tells you where their head is. Let me say it that way. And it tells you to some degree what they're trying to accomplish. So, I'll leave it that way. Robert Bouquet Ray, I was about to call this total scapegoating, Putin's one sin onto another. Putting one sin onto another. Yeah. Yeah. It's not that Putin is a good guy. It's not that Putin is perfect. It's not that Putin is an awesome guy. It has nothing to do with Putin. It has everything to do with whether I want my country gallivanting around the globe. You have a homelessness crisis in California. Why on earth are we in Syria? Syria is not on the border of North Carolina. I keep saying it because I try to get across to people that we have no moral standing, no moral high ground. We have no justification whatsoever to be over there. Zero. None whatsoever. None whatsoever. Do we want to attend to our own affairs here in the States, meaning the homelessness crisis? Do we want to put money into infrastructure? Our infrastructure is crumbling and falling apart. Do we want to make sure people can go to school? Think of all the money that we spend sending people to school, meaning people spend out of their pockets. Think of all the debt that's on their backs. We're talking about debt in the trillions. If we, as a government, paid that debt off, think of all that money that would just infuse into the society itself. If you're talking about giving a massive tax cut or tax break, that will be a massive boom to the economy itself. All of those people with all of the money on their heads, they don't get married, they get stuck in low-paying jobs, or they get stuck in jobs that they may hate. They have this alienated labor thing where they're indebted for the next 30 years. We can relieve that burden as a society. Do you really want people in your society functioning in that way? Essentially getting raped just because they want an education. Would you want your kid having $30,000, $40,000 on the back of his head just wants an education? Half of the jobs in this country, the majority of people work either low-wage jobs or in poverty conditions. How are you paying back $30,000, $40,000 in college loans working somewhat of a low-paid job? I'm just asking, what society do you want? That's all I'm asking. We can have a different society. Not so much we're spending $1 trillion murdering and policing the world, but we can have a different society. We can have one where people can go to school when they want to go to school. In the same way that we have public education, we can have an extra level of college education where people want to go to school. We have the resources to do it. We have the acumen to do it. We just don't. We can provide health care for each and every person in the country. We just don't. It boils down to, what do you want to do as a society? How do you want your society to run? And I guarantee you that the overwhelming majority of the people don't like this idea of spending $1 trillion to police the entire world while things in the country go awry. So I will leave it at that. This video went far longer than what I wanted it to go, but I think it gets my point. So, all right, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks, everyone. And by the way, I'll see you guys probably sometime after 2, and I still have Hard Bastard thing coming up at 5. I'm sorry, at 7. So, see you guys in a few. Thanks, everyone.